Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Full disclosure, I freaked out a bit last Shabbat when I heard the rabbi's sermon about wandering in the desert. How did he know exactly what I was going to talk about today?
Sorry.
Well, I will try my best to riff off of what was already a good thing. Rabbi Steinloff's sermon had a lot of meaning for me as an individual and also as part of the greater Jewish collective people, even as an American. I look back at my wandering path in life, which has ended up so far on Capitol Hill working to transform and repurpose our sick healthcare system. At any one moment in my journey, it's been impossible to see where I would land now, but looking back 50 years later, I can connect all the dots and see that each one led me to my current destination. And so today I want to dig in further to how we find our way to our destination. Embedded in the word destination is the word destiny. Rabbi Steinloff explained that Jews don't really believe in a predetermined fate or destiny, and that the Jewish concept is more akin to being on a path that leads to God. And the chokim, our laws, some of which have no rational explanation, are engraved on our soul to guide us on that path. But I wrestle a bit with this concept of having God as my destination. What does that mean? Which may be why I've always gravitated toward the experiential, mystical traditions of Judaism, which don't need linear reasoning to reach a conclusion. Nonetheless, I'll try to take you through as logically as possible where I end up with the whole Jewish destiny thing. Granted, destiny is a confusing concept in a Jewish context. For me, it's more accurately framed spiritually or even Kabbalistically that we all have a unique path in life that does lead somewhere. And here's where I'll step out more on a limb. And that path is actually our unique, singular, God-given path, which is the human expression during our lifetime of our soul's godly purpose. So I'll say that again. It's the unique God-given path and purpose, and walking that path is the human expression of our soul's purpose. So bear with me. I know there's a wide spectrum of belief here, even about the existence of God. And I'm sure our congregation represents a range. Nonetheless, we're all still Jews. And if you're going to talk Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, I propose to you that it's next to impossible to get around an acceptance of the existence of God and the soul. Talmudic scholar and Kabbalist Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz writes in his timeless work, The 13-Petaled Rose, each individual soul is unique and special in terms of its essence, its capacity, and what is demanded of it. No two souls coincide in their actions, their functions, and their paths. No one soul can take the place of another, and even the greatest of the great cannot fill the special role, the particular place of another that may be the smallest of the small. And you don't have to look far in Judaism to find examples of those with a definitive God-given path. Of course, there was Noah and the ark. And then there's Moses, who clearly had a God-given path, starting with rather direct messaging from God at the burning bush. All our matriarchs and patriarchs had God-given paths, playing their unique part in nurturing the Jews toward their destiny or their identity as the chosen people. And more immediate for us, every year our Jewish tradition says God determines our destiny, literally sealing our fate in the book of life between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Even the Yiddish word bashert, often associated with finding our destined soulmate, can be literally translated as destiny. The big catch, however, in the Jewish concept of destiny and one's unique path is that we Jews believe in this troublesome thing called free will. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov said it simply, what is free will? If you want, you do it. If you don't want, you don't do it. But then he goes on to say, everything you see in the world, everything that exists is there for the sake of free will, in order to test people. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. To me, this means we can make free choices at each fork in the road of our lives, but those choices have consequences, and they are the key to whether we stay aligned with our unique path and fulfill our godly purpose or veer off course, potentially way off course. In our Jewish tradition, these choices have gravity. Reconsider the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur when we hear in no uncertain terms that our choices about investing in tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah will inform if we can avert the harshness of the decree. As a psychotherapist, I'll go a step further and say that when we begin living out of balance with our sense of purpose, at the emotional level, it often leads to angst and an internal struggle we call clinical depression. Purposelessness, emptiness, questions of why am I here are the language of depression I've heard so many times in my office over decades. So I'm proposing that we Jews do indeed have a God-given path, an earthly expression of our soul, and even a destination. But I'm further proposing the possibility that depending on our choices, we may not reach that destination, at least not in this lifetime. But I'm going to avoid that conversation. That's a Kabbalist discussion for another date. So to move on here and finish up, if you accept this framework that I'm proposing, then making the right godly choices takes on immense importance. Luckily, as Jews, we have an endless, renewable resource of wisdom to draw on to help us. We have the chokim, or laws, that the rabbi spoke of last week, that are engraved on our soul. And we also have an incredibly rich, vast array of rabbinic teachings to draw on. And we have the Torah. The miracle of the Torah is that it's like a hologram, where every part of that hologram carries the entirety of the information that make up the whole. Now, I may be stretching this analogy a little bit, but I want to see if I can make it work. You can dig into any single parsha in the Torah, and just like a hologram, in that single component, there's a comprehensive Torah wisdom that has relevance, guidance, and meaning to your life in the present. So here's the practical application that for me, in today's parasha, Bamidbar, is pertinent. Bamidbar, in the wilderness or in the desert, we find the Israelites, surprise, following their God-given path, literally being led by God on their path by a pillar of smoke by day and fire by night. And what gem of Torah wisdom pops out of the parsha to guide me on my path as someone who lives and breathes healthcare reform? God instructs Moses to take a census, counting people, which actually is neither boring or irrelevant here. It turns out the census is a powerful guiding tool depending on what information you gather and how you analyze it. In America, we take a census every 10 years, and the 2020 census data is coincidentally just now being analyzed on the heels of the gravest global plague of our lifetime. Nothing demonstrates the power of the census data more to inform our decisions about changing healthcare policy than the current census demographics when matched up with the demographics of the pandemic. Not only does the census shed light on each individual citizen's health, but we also can see how every individual citizen is both dependent and interdependent on those of the collective whole. And more clearly than ever, how factors like structural racism, health access inequity, income disparities, and even what zip code we live in affects our health and the prosperity of the entire country. And then there's more guidance, drawing from our vast rabbinic resources. Eminent rabbi, medical ethicist, scholar, and friend of Rabbi Steinloff, Elliot Dorff, doesn't equivocate on the Jewish guiding principles here. Quote, the fact that more than 40 million Americans have no health insurance is, from a Jewish point of view, an intolerable dereliction of society's moral duty. The Torah, the prophets, and the rabbis of our tradition are all loudly proclaimed that God commands us to take care of the poor, the starving, and the sick. Given the current costs of healthcare, almost all of us fall into that category. And actually, that's no joke. Healthcare is bankrupting this country. On both moral and religious grounds, then, we simply cannot let the present condition continue. We are duty-bound to find a way to afford healthcare for all American citizens, end quote. The lessons here for me guide my path away from partisan political argument about whether healthcare is a privilege or a right, to an ethical fact based on decisions that will guide the nation forward, and a knowledge that it is really a matter of our collective survival of what needs to happen in our healthcare system. So this leads me to one last question before I end, which seems particularly relevant now. That is, do nations also have a God-given path? Do they have a divine destination? Yesterday was the 73rd anniversary of Israel's independence, reestablishing it as a Jewish nation after over 2,000 years of exile. The idea of Israel being God's promised land for the Jews and the path back to Zion has been a central theme for Jews since the Babylonian exile in 539 BCE. And miraculously, in 1948, that God-given path was realized. Is it coincidence, luck, or divine providence based on collective choices of the Jewish people? That answer is beyond my pay grade. However, the story isn't quite over. This past week, we are reminded again in the news, again, of the enormous challenges Israel faces and the potential existential choices on its path. Coincidentally, the 2021 census in Israel is also underway, and the demographic data there is no less powerful or important. The more pertinent question for me is how Israel will use that data to proceed from here. Do they make decisions that will keep it aligned or not aligned with its soul? My final prayer is that we as individuals, that we as a collective Jewish people, we as a nation, America, and we as a Jewish state, Israel, continue to draw on our vast renewable Jewish resources, our chokim, our rabbinic teachings, and our timeless holographic Torah in ways that don't just soften the harshness of the decree, but that we actually stay on a path that reaches the definitive Jewish final destination, the God-given destiny, and please hear this and define it in any way that fits your personal belief system and gives you the most hope that we stay on a path to reach the final Jewish destination, Ha'olam Haba'ah, also known as the world to come. Shabbat Shalom.